Philosophy is the study of the fundamental questions regarding reasoning, knowledge, value, and in general, human existence. Questions such as, is there God? What is the purpose of life? Or how does the world revolve? Are within the scope of philosophy, or at least in the past. The modern definition of philosophy does not include other disciplines that were considered as philosophy in the past, such as physics and psychology. But why does philosophy matter if the other fields of science are now recognized as an individual field of its own? Well, that is because philosophy helps us to understand ourselves by exploring our own consciousness, ethics, and logics. We could become a better person. One of the main goals that we seem to be constantly chasing is the urge to become better, to live a better life, and to be fulfilled. Philosophy could help with that. But not in the way we normally think, as philosophy is not a bandage for a quick fix in our life, but more of a general guideline to how to live well. So here is the guide to live a good life with philosophy. Before we can explore how to live a good life, we must first define what constitutes a good life. And this is the first step with philosophy, which is to look within ourselves and discover what is truly important for us. For Nietzsche, what constitutes a good life is the life lived in the attempting the impossible. As for Søren Kierkegaard, self-actualization in our existence is what constitutes a good life. And for Buddha, a life without desire is one that is without suffering as well, hence a good life. I could go on all day and list all of the ways different thinkers of the past think regarding life. But these are different definitions of what makes a good life from the most acclaimed thinkers of the past. But do not mistake this as a rule that one must pick and choose a definition as the philosophers, since it makes no sense to do so. The point here is that we must define our own definition. As Søren Kierkegaard puts it, we ought not to think, what is the meaning of life, but frame it as what is the meaning of life to me instead. We could follow in the footsteps of those from the past, but it must be from our own volition. With that said, we shall look at the various ways in philosophy that we could use to improve our lives. Philosophical presentism argues that only the present exists, hence neither the past nor the future exists, since it does not happen now. Although the past has happened and the future will happen, they do not exist for presentism because it is not in the present. Fyodor Shcherbatskoy wrote, "Everything past is unreal, everything future is unreal, everything imagined, absent, mental is unreal. Ultimately, real is only the present moment of physical efficiency. Hence, the past is just a perceived event, while the future is an anticipated event, so we must not focus on it. Instead, we should focus on reality, which is the present, the now." Søren Kierkegaard, an 18th century Danish philosopher that is credited as the father of existentialism, wrote that the human existence is not of their own volition, as we are placed in this life at a particular time and circumstances that are not of our own making. However, we could come to a self-actualization, which in the sickness unto death, Kierkegaard explores the various ways to achieve self-actualization and escape despair. Søren Kierkegaard's explanation of a wasted human existence is one that is filled with too much indulgence in the possibilities. It is very dangerous to go into eternity with possibilities which one has oneself prevented from becoming realities, said Søren Kierkegaard. Possibilities are like oxygen. One cannot live without it, but one cannot also breathe pure oxygen. Sometimes we are too hung up on the what-ifs that we neglect the present. We may indulge in possibilities of the future or the past, for that matter, from time to time, but too much of it will lead to a wasted existence. Thus, to achieve self-actualization, one must not live in an imaginary world or a world without hope, So a balance between what-ifs and the now must be in equilibrium in order to avoid the sin of despair. What does this all mean? It means that one should not spend too much time conjuring the illusion of the future. An excessive time spent indulging in the possibilities will lead you to a fantasy land, while actions and decisions of the present are sacrificed. Similarly, Lao Tzu, a semi-legendary Chinese Taoist philosopher, said that to have a good life, one must not dwell on the past or the future, but focus on the present. Thus, we are only at peace if we are living in the moment. In our daily lives, we spend the majority of our time thinking of either the past or the future, while neglecting the present. So, we are always caught up in an imaginary timeline that we push back on actions and decisions of the now. So for a good life to be achieved, we must not think too much of the future possibilities or the past, in which we cannot change. Both Eastern and Western philosophy seem to agree upon the notion that desire is the root cause of suffering. Lao Tzu, in his Tao Te Ching, describes the natural state that we should strive to achieve. Wu Wei, or non-action, is a method of living that is aligned with their natural state, or being in a state that is not forceful. Although it sounds paradoxical, acting in a way that is non-action, it is a concept similar to that of the state of flow in the Western world. So, to be one with Wu Wei, we must be free from desires, so we must act, not out of personal agenda or desires, but one that is in accordance with nature. One of the more prominent Eastern philosophies is that of Buddhism. Buddha recognized that life is suffering. There is a root cause to suffering. There is an ending to suffering, and there are paths toward the end of suffering. That is the Four Noble Truths by Buddha. We are too attached to material or worldly desires, which is why we become dissatisfied when we lack or lose such things. The eightfold path to end suffering or desire is having the right view, the right intention, the right speech, the right action, the right livelihood, the right effort, the right mindfulness, and the right concentration. The pursuit of pleasure is nothing but a fleeting endeavor, as our thirsts for pleasure and desire is a never-ending one. A pleasure or desire satisfied will lead to an even greater desire for better pleasure or more desire. This idea too is explored by Arthur Schopenhauer, a 19th century German philosopher that is known for his pessimism, so it is quite ironic to discuss a happy or better life through the lens of Schopenhauer. But Schopenhauer's view regarding desire is no less brilliant. He believes that humans aren't rational creatures. We seek to understand the world, but we also are accompanied by our desires to obtain things from the world. We will focus on the latter part of the argument, as Schopenhauer discovered that the act of satisfying our desire rarely brings us happiness. Even if it does, it is merely temporary, as this act is accompanied by an even greater desire. So this cycle will result in either a perpetual desire or simply boredom. For Schopenhauer, we who have sufficient needs satisfied, such as food and shelter, tend to find ourselves in the pursuit of luxury, alcohol, tobacco, or other worldly things that bring us temporary joy, as it is our only way of escaping the boredom of life. Then, as he puts it, life is just a cycle of pain and suffering, like a pendulum swaying back and forth. The next time you catch yourself in this endless loop of wants, remember, the thing we desire rarely brings us true happiness. It is hard to practice non-attachment, especially after we have grown so accustomed to it all of our lives. However, what we could practice is to give little attachment or none at all to things that are unnecessary for our survival. Luxury, status, or other tangible or intangible things that on its own does not provide any value except the value we have attached to it, should not be the main subject of our desire. Thus, we must gradually consume less and tend toward a state where we only require things that are necessary to sustain our lives. Over time, we will get used to such a lifestyle that our desires for external objects or cravings would dissipate. hence putting a stop to the endless cycle of suffering and desire. Whether it is achieved through Wu Wei or the Eightfold Path, we must strive to live in a state of non-attachment if we wish to live a better life. Widely regarded as the father of Western logic, Aristotle argued that virtue is the only good. His approach to virtue ethics could teach us how to approach life with the same mindset. For a good life, virtue and morality must be our priority. This is Aristotle's ethical virtue, and it is one of the oldest ethical theories in the world. Similar to his teacher, Socrates, and also another profound philosopher, Plato, Aristotle believes a well-lived life is one that takes virtues to be central to one's life. One contrasting view of Aristotle to that of Plato's is that one does not need to be well-versed in sciences, mathematics, and philosophy before one could understand or practice goodness. What separates human beings from other creatures is our ability to reason. A good life is one that is filled with using our reasoning over the course of our entire life, and this includes doing things with virtue and excellence. But what makes us virtuous? It is the ability to discern from what is good and what is bad, and engage in those activities that are good, or as it is called, virtuous activities. Aristotle does not explicitly name what constitutes goodness or virtuous, but he claims that the list is easily compiled based on one's wisdom. Excellence or virtuous is then conducted habitually in one's life. So, we must practice living well, instead of focusing on the state of being. For example, an overindulgence in simple pleasure may result in negative behavior traits over the long run, while if one dedicates oneself to virtue, one will undoubtedly become selfless and virtuous. Thus, to live well is just not a state of being, say feeling happy or fulfilled, but consists of doing virtuous activity, which includes being happy. Contrasting to Buddhism or Schopenhauer's philosophy, Aristotle believes that a good life does not only consist of inner tranquility, but also external things as well. Good friends, wealth, power, and health are all external goods that can elevate us to live a better life. As Aristotle stated, being happy is a virtuous activity, so we must be surrounded by other goods. We must not lack those external goods or have too much of it, as those who are too weak, powerless, or poor do not have many opportunities for virtuous activity. To a certain extent, the highest goods, which are virtuous activities, do not occur by chance. Those who are fortunate enough to have parents or fellow citizens to help them become virtuous must share much of the responsibility as well. So, for a better living, we must engage in virtuous activity on a daily basis. One of the more popular Western philosophies regarding how to live life is that of Stoicism. It is no surprise, however, as Stoicism does provide crucial insight to the human nature and things we could implement to live a better life. Stoicism is a school of thought that is meant to be practical in daily lives. It began with Zeno of Citium, when his ship sank on the way to Piraeus, where he ended up in Athens and was introduced to the philosophy of Socrates and Crates of Thebes. Due to these influences, Zeno began developing his own thinking and principles that we came to know as Stoicism. One of the most important figures of Stoicism is Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor between 161 AD to 180 AD. He was arguably the most powerful man at the time, yet he dealt with struggles the same as every other human under his empire. During his time as emperor, Marcus Aurelius kept a personal diary that was not meant for anyone to read except himself, displaying much of his deepest thinking and philosophy regarding life, which were later compiled under the name of Meditations. One of his records in the Meditations is his argument with himself in the morning. When Marcus wakes up every morning, he finds himself desperately clinging onto his bed and fighting hard to not get up. But in the end, he still wakes up, even though he is not expected to. At dawn, When you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work. As a human being, I'm going to do what I was born for. Or is this what I was created for? To huddle under the blankets and stay warm. This is important because as humans, our tendency is to take the path of least resistance. But at the end of the day, we know what truly brings us happiness is completing the work that is meant to be completed. The task of waking up early or overcoming an obstacle is not an easy one, but as Marcus Aurelius puts it, are we meant to huddle under the blankets and stay warm? We must recognize that our purpose goes beyond comfort. We must learn to put in the effort and the hours if we wish to live a more fulfilled life, so we must go against our natural inclination toward a comfortable life. Thus, we must make time for ourselves every morning to do the work that is important to us, regardless how we feel at the moment. Another important lesson from Stoicism is the dichotomy of control. That is, we ought to only focus on the things that are within our control, while things that are not in our control should not bother nor distract us. Life is hard and is filled with things that are not within our control. So, the most important task of our lives is to be able to distinguish what we can and cannot control. Only then can we focus our limited energy toward the things that we can control. The past could not be changed, so one must not be so hung up on it. The future, to a certain extent, could not be changed. Only our actions and decisions right now are within our control. We either choose to be lazy and procrastinate, or we choose to be disciplined and work. That is within our control. Natural disasters, nor sickness, nor the weather, nor the traffic are not within our control. Certain things may occur without explanation, and if we dwell on it for too long, we are bound to live in a state of perpetual suffering. Since we are unable to change those circumstances, according to Epictetus, we should not let it distract us from things that we can control. We must act upon the things that we could change, and this is where most of our efforts should lie. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Finally, we suffer more from imagination than from reality, said Seneca. The notion of we suffer more in our head than reality is one of which is similar to the dichotomy of control. Our lives are filled with unexpected events, so it is natural for us to imagine the worst-case scenario, either as a coping mechanism or as a way to prepare beforehand. However, taking this to an extreme may lead to unnecessary suffering, mostly self-induced and imaginary. Mark Twain famously said, "I am an old man and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened." We tend to let our imagination run loose in a stressful situation. By anticipating sorrow before it occurs, we will suffer twice if the sorrow we imagined even occurs at all. Philosophy is a huge field of study that is intertwined with other fields. Thus, exploring everything about it in this short video would be impossible. Decades of dedicated studies of the field is required to even grasp the most fundamental of philosophy. This video serves as merely a first step toward a journey of 1,000 miles. The things that are discussed above is strictly an overview, as diving into each philosophical idea deeply requires an independent video on its own. As mentioned earlier, this should not be a guidebook or a step-by-step tutorial, but more of a very simplified version of the field, at least the most popular ones within the field.